name is Tony Seaton. I'm with the Strategic Management Department here at Fox, and today we're going to be talking about the value chain and configuring activities to create competitive advantage. And our learning objectives for this session are going to be 1, to relate activities to competitive advantage and the value chain. 2, to explain the benefits of the value chain.
3,
then to describe the elements of the value chain in detail. And lastly, to explore sample value chain and value creation. Now, before I get started, I just want to make one comment about activities. One way to look at any firm, any company, is in terms of its activities. And oftentimes, I say that a firm is really nothing more than just a uniquely assembled group of activities. Many firms conduct similar activities, but they do them differently than their competitors, and that's in part what creates competitive advantage for them. So let's begin by actually looking at activities and the relationship to competitive advantage within the value chain. First concept I want us to grab hold of is the fact that all firms seek to develop their competitive advantage and to create shareholder value, right? We want to be better than our competition. We want something that's attractive so that customers will choose us over the competition, thus creating more sales, resulting in more net profit, and hopefully more value that's going to be returned to our shareholders. So how do we do this? Well, we do it in part by how we configure this myriad of activities by which we do business. All firms, right, can be looked at as nothing more than an assemblage of activities uniquely configured to give them a competitive advantage. Third, the firm seeks to create a wide wedge between the cost to produce a product and the customer's perceived value or willingness to pay for that product, or simply cost and value. And this wedge is something that's really important, right? We have cost on the bottom and we have value at the top. And our goal is to drive down cost, increase value, what customers are willing to pay. And in the middle there, in the middle of that wedge is what I like to call the yum-yum, right? And we want to create as much yum-yum as possible. One of the most important ways by which we do that is how we efficiently configure our particular activities. Some other things to note here is, one, that all activities generate cost, but far fewer create value, right? So again, if our goal here is to create a wide wedge between cost and value, when we're looking at our activities, one of the things we have to recognize is it doesn't matter what we do, we're going to be adding cost to it. So hopefully we can add a little more value so that we actually enjoy a profit. So therefore, all firms seek to configure their activities such that costs are tightly managed and that the maximum value is created. One way, and really the focus of our discussion today, that we can look at this or visualize this is through the value chain. So what are some benefits of actually looking at a firm through this model? Well, one thing is that there's insight into why the firm does or does not have added value. If we looked at specific activities, if we kind of drill down to them, we can see which one of those activities is creating value and which one of those activities, let's say, is destroying value. Another benefit is it's a way to identify opportunities to improve added value, right? If we look at a particular, let's say, operational activity and realize that we're not producing as many products per hour as we once were, we know where we should be focusing in on that, right, in the operational venue. And lastly, an important benefit here at least, is an understanding of how added value may change over time. Now, value chain is one way of looking at a firm, and I always tell students, there are lots of different ways that we can look at firms. We can look at different parts of firms, we can look at the environment surrounding the firm, but we never want to do this just once and done. We don't just have one peek at it and we have all of our insight. Because you know what? Life is fluid, it's very dynamic, and the business world is highly dynamic and it's changing over time. And so we actually should be we should have the discipline to be looking at our activities continuously. We need to see if there's some trends that are developing that we need to pay attention to. We need to see if there's efficiencies that are being created in certain parts of the firm that maybe we can replicate in other parts of the firm. But we don't do that just once a year as, say, part of a strategic planning exercise. So again, this is something that's not done just once and done. All right, let's take a look at a generic value chain just to kind of get a lay of the land here. So Michael Porter had developed this back in the 80s, and this was his way of visualizing how a firm puts together, right, configures that myriad of activities in a way to create margin or added value for the firm, profit for the firm, okay? And so you see on the top here, we've got support activities. On the bottom, we have primary activities. And along the right edge, the arrowhead there is the margin, all right? And so in the support activities, we've got things like firm infrastructure or human resource management, technology, and procurement. Across the bottom there, we've got inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and service. Let's just talk about these in groups very briefly, and then we'll break them down a little bit further. So, three important terms from that previous, that generic model I showed you. One is primary activities. The best way that I know of to describe a primary activity is primary activities are those activities that are directly responsible for the creation of a product or service. Another way of looking at it is it's those activities that touch the product as it's being produced or sold, right? Support activities are those activities that assist the primary activities to gain the competitive advantage, right? HR doesn't actually make the product, but HR assists operations by giving them the right people to make the product. And lastly, very, very important, is this idea of margin or profit margin. And going back to this concept of the wedge, this is the difference between the cost to produce the product or service. Very important, this works in service-based industries just as easily as product-based. And it's the difference between that and the customer's willingness to pay for the product or service. That's the yum-yum in the middle there, right? So we want to lower cost, we want to raise value. By way of example, I just want to share with you a widget. Now, a widget is one of those ubiquitous things we talk about in business school. I'm sure you've heard it discussed before. I've been talking about it for years, although I've never really visualized what a widget looks like. So one Thanksgiving, I was visiting family, and my brother is a woodworker. I said, you know what, Kenny? We need to build a widget because when I talk to my students about widgets, I don't have anything really to show them. So we've come up with a widget. So you can see here, these are Seton Brothers widgets, incorporated, patent pending. Now, a widget, very simple, right? Not a lot goes into the widget. It's wood, it's hinges, and it's screws or brads or nails, right? Not a lot to a widget. Very, very simple device. But I think it's a great way to take a look at the value chain to see how it actually operates. So why don't we take Seton Brother widgets here, patent pending, of course, and see how it would fit into our model value chain. All right, so we've looked at the value chain here. Again, across the top are those support activities. They make the primary activities possible or facilitate them in some way. And you'll see a lot more detail here. So when we're looking at the top line, administrative, it includes things like legal and accounting and financial management. Human resource, of course, we know is more than just about hiring people, but it's about training them, it's about managing them, it's about resourcing them. Product and technology development includes R&D, processes, different equipment, and procurement is actually obtaining the inputs that we need for whatever it is we're creating. In this case, it's a widget. So envision, if you will, this box of activities, remember this myriad activities here, as a factory. And if you were looked on the left side of the factory, where you see the word primary activities there, imagine that you've got a loading dock, all right? And so this is where your trucks come in with all of your inputs. So remember, with our widgets, they're basically just made of wood and hinges and screws, right? So what comes into that loading dock there at that point of inbound logistics is a bunch of wood and screws and hinges. Now, obviously, there's cost associated with that, right? They're really not, in terms of actually being a widget, we really can't visualize it as such, although there's probably some value. It's just minimal value at that point. But, inbound logistics is more than just the truck showing up and actually dumping the wood and the screws and hinges off. There are some things that we have to do. So here you'll see listed on the slide, there's quality control. We want to make sure that the wood is high quality wood. It's not knotty. It's not splintered, right? So, we need to go through it. We want to make sure that the hinges aren't bent and the screws aren't rusted. And so quality control, very important activity that we need to be engaged in because we don't want to make poor quality widgets, and we want something that people are going to buy. And so we're adding costs there, right? Quality control is looking through it. It's not making much of a widget, but it is handling it, right? It also includes receiving, it includes raw materials control, and very important here, it includes scheduling. So scheduling at this point, at least for my widgets, I'm looking at, I've got all these inputs here. How do I schedule them in terms of making sure I'm producing enough widgets at the right time to meet demand? And will those materials be in the hands of the right people in the operations group, in the production department, at the right time so that I'm doing it efficiently? So we get through inbound logistics. Again, our wedge, the difference between cost and value, we've added a lot of costs here, right? A lot of manpower, a lot of processing of materials, but we haven't added that much in terms of value. We get into operation, and that's typically what most of us think of when we think of a company producing something. That's kind of the shop floor, right? This is where the magic happens. This is where we go from wood and hinges and screws to an actual widget, right? So whether we have craftsmen on the floor working at workbenches, creating these by hand, or maybe we have equipment in there and it's an automated process, but we're actually creating the widget. That transformational process there, of course it adds costs, right? We've got equipment, we've got supplies, and we've got manpower, but now we've moved from a pile of stuff to an actual widget. So value goes up significantly at this point. Other activities within operations could be production control, quality control, and by the way, you'll see quality assurance, quality control throughout the process here. We're always looking at quality. And of course, maintenance, right? We want to make sure that our craftspeople have tools that are working well, or the equipment is operating as efficiently as it can. So now that we have widgets, we need to be concerned with where we send them to, right? Are we sending them to stores? Are we sending them directly to customers who are maybe purchasing them on our website? How are we actually sending these out? And that's outbound logistics. And that includes maybe finishing them. Maybe we're making widgets for Walmart and they want a private label widget, and so they're going to want their own sticker on it and special packaging, and maybe they want multi-packs. Whatever it is that the customer is requiring, outbound logistics is focusing on. And hopefully, in the process of doing this, we're adding value as well, not just the cost associated with it. The package, of course, adds value. You had a basic marketing class. I'm sure you understand that the wrapping paper is important, right? We want something that's going to make our product attractive. We've got more quality control that's going on there. We've got invoicing, we've got delivery, all of these activities to get the product, right, from the factory to where the customer is going, or where the customer is located, excuse me. All right, so it shows as a next step, but it's really kind of a concurrent step here, is sales and marketing, all right? Now, keep in mind, all of these operations, these activities have touched the product directly, right? Inbound logistic has checked it out. Operations has, put it together. Outbound logistics has kind of packaged it and sent it on its way. Sales and marketing, they hold it up, and they show the customer why this product is the product that they need, why this is the best widget any customer can find. So sales and marketing is interested in many ways in terms of the widget and the value it brings to customers, right? So what are some of the things that we're focused on here in terms of sales and marketing? Well, customer management, right? Making sure that we're in contact with the customer, that we're meeting their needs, we're getting good feedback from them. Order taking, whether it's a commercial customer like Walmart, or it's through a call center and we're handling individual orders, or whether we're taking orders for our website. Promotion, right? We want, certain times of the year, widgets may be of greater value. Christmas is the perfect time to give someone a widget, right? Sales analysis is important, and market research. One of the most important things that sales and marketing does, again, is demonstrate to the customer why this widget is so important. How is this widget going to change your life, right? Because if I can demonstrate to the customer that they absolutely need this product, and this product is going to make a big difference in their quality of life, then they're much more likely to attach greater value to it and are willing to pay more. And this is value creation. This is where I'm widening the widget. All right? So sales and marketing, very, very important. Are there costs associated with it? Absolutely. Although probably not nearly as much in cost as there is value being created. The last step on our kind of chain of activity, primary activities here, is servicing. Now, one important comment to make about servicing is that traditionally when we thought about product servicing, we thought about it in terms of warranty and maintenance, right? Or we thought about it in terms of what happens when something goes wrong. My widget, I don't know, the hinge breaks on it. Or I receive a defective widget, right? It's missing one of the screws. And, I'm not happy about that. I paid good money for my widget. You company, Seton Brothers Widgets, what are you going to do to make this right? And so servicing, traditionally again, was an activity that had a lot of cost associated with it, but didn't provide necessarily that much value. Matter of fact, some people would say it was a way of looking at, kind of mitigating our risk or reducing, the total cost associated with a bad customer experience. Well, one of the things that I found very interesting, and particularly in the last 20 or so years, are companies that have realized that the servicing set of activities can actually create value in the mind of the customer so that they're willing to spend more on your particular product. And the example I like to hold out there is Apple. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with Apple. Probably many of you own an iPhone or an iPad or a MacBook or an Apple Watch. And so, Apple creates a great product. We know that. I mean, one of the great things is it works out of the box. But in terms of servicing, they've done something very unique. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Apple Store, right? The Apple Store is a place to go for information. You don't have to call a call center, right? You don't have to send them an email. You can show up to any Apple Store and ask any question about any of their products, and there are a slew of people there who are willing to answer your questions. Now, do they sell stuff in an Apple Store? Absolutely. But one of the greatest things that they provide to customers has nothing, it isn't about the product in a box, but it's actually information about how to make the best use of that product. I love it. I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, and I have a MacBook. I love them all. I remember one time I was very frustrated in that I like to keep my calendar synced up, right? I want I get an email, I accept a meeting invitation. I want to make sure that gets transported over my phone. And if I'm in a classroom with my tablet, I want to make sure it's alerting me to these things. I just could not get these three things to talk together, right? To talk to one another properly. And maybe part of the problem was I was running Microsoft Outlook on my MacBook and different platform on the other two devices. But the nice thing about this and the Apple Store was I took all three of these devices into the Apple Store. I said, I can't get to do this. It's got to be able to do this, right? And someone very patiently sat me down. We went over to the Genius Bar, sat down, we pulled the three devices out, and they walked me through the process to get those three to communicate. This was a huge win for me, right? I didn't have to worry about missing meetings if I didn't have my laptop with me to alert me to it. What did it cost me? Absolutely nothing. Did it cost Apple something? Absolutely. They have a lot of people in these stores. They're located in very popular retail districts, and so there's a lot of costs associated with it. But what was the value? Well, the value was now I can do more with my product than when I first bought it, right? And isn't that great? You buy a product that's going to do something for you, and then you find out it can do something else that you hadn't even thought about. I don't know how often I'll have people over my house, and they'll grab my iPad or something, and they'll say, "Did you know you could do this with it?" Or you could do it? I'm like, I had no idea. So that Apple is willing to do that and not charge a fee for it makes me a much more loyal user of Apple products. And so the value, in my mind, for Apple products goes up significantly. And we've all heard about, the loyalty to Apple products, right? I mean, kind of raving fans out there in terms of Apple products. This creates significant value for customers, and as a result, people are much more willing to continue buying Apple products because they know that no matter what the question or what the challenge they have with their product is, they can take it into an Apple Store and they're going to get their answers. They're going to be provided with the answers that they need. All right, so now we've gone through this process and we've seen that with each one of these activities at every step, we've added cost, obviously, right? And hopefully we've added some value in excess of that cost. And if we've done that, we've actually created profit, right? We've created that yum there, all right? So what I want to do is I actually just want to briefly share with you kind of a table I've created here to actually demonstrate how we add cost and value throughout the process there, all right? Now, remember, all activities add cost, so even the support activities are adding significant cost. So if you look on the stage column on the far left here, you'll look at procurement, right? That's a supporting activity. They're the ones that are actually ordering the inputs. Again, for our widgets, it would be the wood and the hinges and the screws. And let's say the cost per widget is about 50 cents, right? And the value that's created is about 25 cents. Now, clearly, at the end of procurement, we're not making any money, and we're actually in the red. Inbound logistics, right? Lots of costs associated with it. We've kind of organized the materials. It doesn't add a whole lot of value. We really don't have much of a widget here. So at that point, our profit margin is even less. But once we actually get into creating the widget at operations, we see we add significant costs, let's say $5 here for a widget, but we've added so much more in terms of value because we've gone from a pile of stuff to an actual widget that people are going to want to buy. And now we have a positive profit margin, which is great. And as we move through the other steps, outbound logistics, let's say there's a washer, we had about $2 in cost and $2 in value. Sales and marketing, if they've done their job well, they've demonstrated or created this need in the mind of the consumer that they have to have this widget to change their life. Some costs associated with it, but significant value. So now our $250 profit margin is now $650. And servicing, if we have a positive customer service experience out there for our customers, we can actually add value kind of like what Apple does. Maybe I have a website that will show you the 101 different ways that you can use your widget, and people will like that, right? And then we would add on to that the total of all other support activities, activities associated with research and development and administration and HR, and you see significant costs, not a whole lot of value. At the end of the day, we now have a profit margin of $6. So how much did it cost us to make an individual widget? About $14. But what was the value created at each one of those steps? Well, it totaled about $20. So our profit margin is 30%. And in the widget industry, that's a great profit margin, and we're very, very happy with that. Now, let me say that in any value chain, any set of activities, you should be able to measure those activities. There should be some way of measuring effectiveness and some way of looking at the economic cost and contribution to value there. So you can focus in on what are the activities that make me the most amount of money and what are the activities that cost me the most. So before we conclude, I'd like to leave you with one final consideration, and that is this idea that it's really more of a web than a chain. And so when we're creating value chains, or more importantly, when we're actually analyzing value chains, it's important not to analyze individual activities in isolation, right? They are part of a connected group of activities. So we don't want to look at them all by themselves. So value chains here, you can see, are highly interdependent. And again, they're more like a web. And I guess the best way to do it would be to give you an example, all right? So I kind of alluded to this earlier in discussion. Sometimes we have product defects, right? We make a widget, and the customer receives it, and it's broken, or the hinge is bent, or whatever it might be. It's very easy to go back to the production group, right, where our craftspeople are at, or our machines that are making our widgets are located, and say, that's the problem. That's where the defect occurred, right? It's your fault for making a defective widget. But let me ask you this. Let's say that our technology changed on the shop floor, and we didn't train our craftspeople on how to use that technology. Is the issue really with the laborers, the craftspeople in the operations group, or is it actually more of an issue with HR, which is a support activity? Or maybe it's an issue with technology. Maybe the machinery isn't operating the way that it should. Right? So I say this to say, sometimes the issue is deeper than we think it might be. It's not as simple as, pointing the finger at operations. So we want to look at these activities in context and remember that they are interdependent, right? HR is there to facilitate operations, but HR at times could create some challenges for operations as well. So that's our discussion of value chains. Just to go briefly review our learning objectives. 1, we talked about relating activities to competitive advantage and the value chain. We talked about explaining the benefits of the value chain. We described the various elements of a value chain. And lastly, we explored a sample value chain and value creation in the context of Seton Brothers widgets. I hope this has been a beneficial video for you and that you will go out and buy one of our widgets as soon as possible.